With all the effort that went into making modules possible in JavaScript, it was obvious that there was a need for modules as a standard part of the language. Along with everything else that was added with the ECMAScript 6 standard, modules were also included. And this is the future of modules. So in this topic, we'll introduce native modules using a simple example. With the implementation of native modules, we no longer have to rely on closure and enclosing functions to provide us with a module structure. Like CommonJS, a simple JavaScript file will now provide the private features of a module and won't pollute the global space. But we do need to set these up, so let's look at how to do that. So really quick, I've got a utilities file. It has 3 functions: format name, uppercase name, we've looked at previously, and then I have yell name, which basically just uses the uppercase and then adds this punctuation on the end that I have set up here. So simple file. We just want to focus on the syntax of modules, not worry about what the code is doing. Then over here in app.js, all I have right now is a console log statement. And then index.html, basic HTML file. I don't even have any script tags in here yet. So that's what we have to begin with. Now, in order to implement native modules, we have 2 new keywords that we're going to be working with. And these are export and import. So very simple. Anything we want to make public and available, we export. Anything we want to use from another module, we import. Now, in addition to using these keywords in our JavaScript files, we must also do some additional setup in the HTML files. That's why I have that open. And we'll look at that in just a moment. So first, let's tackle these files. Now, I'm going to show you a couple of ways to do exports. Now, this first type of export is just inline. And so let's say I want to make format name and yell name. Those 2 I want to make public. I want to be able to use them in app.js. So I can just put the word export in front, and that will make those public. Now, let's take a look at how we would import those. So I'm going to put the import statement up here at the top. So the keyword is import, very simple. And then inside of curly braces, this is where we put the things we want to import from the file or module that we're importing from. Now, in the case of utilities, there's 2 things that are public: format name and yell name. I can import both of them, or I can import just one of them. So if I just wanted to import one, it would be like that. And then I indicate from and where we're importing from. And this is a text string. This is a path, either relative or absolute path to the JavaScript file. So I want to import from utilities, and it's in the same directory, so I do the /. All right. Now that's just one of those, and that's how I'd need to import those. Now this is not an object, the curly braces here. This is just the syntax that's required for importing. Now, if I want to import more than one thing, I just put them in as a list, separated by a comma. So that's the import statement. Now let's go ahead and use those. So I'm going to declare a variable here and set that equal to format name. And I'll just pass in my name, last name, first name, because format name will reverse that for us. So I want to do that. And then let's take and just log to the console yell name. And we'll pass in that variable that we retrieved. All right. So let me save that. And obviously right now I have none of the script tags in here. And so before we can see if this works with this HTML file, I need to add the script tags. So let me do that really quick. And the first one I'll add, doesn't really matter the order. Dependency issues are resolved with these. Let me add the second one, utilities. Probably should put the full path. just to be safe. All right, so I've got the source tags in there. I'm going to save that. Now let's go ahead and take a look and see if this works for us. So I'm going to use Live Server, which I have in Visual Studio Code. Just click on that, and that's going to open up a HTML page for me in the browser, and then I'm going to look at the console. And right now I'm getting uncaught syntax error. Cannot use import statement outside a module. Unexpected token export. So it doesn't like either of those. So why is this? Well, as you may remember, when we first started into this, I mentioned that we need to do something to the HTML file. So there are some things we need to do there as well in order for modules to work for us. So let me come back in here inside the script tag. I need to enter a type attribute, and that type is module. Whoops. And I've got to spell it right. So that will cause both of these. So any file where we use import or export, either one, it doesn't matter, but if we use an import keyword or an export keyword, we have to indicate type of module. There we go. Let's save that, and let's take a look at that file again. And there we go. We've got the results, Stephen Hancock. So it reversed the names, the first name and last name, and it also uppercase and put the exclamation point on the end. So there we've created our first module using native modules. Now, there are a couple of different ways to do exports and imports. So I want to show you just some different approaches. But before we do that, let me mention one thing, something that's important. This file that we just looked at, in order for modules to work, it needs to be served up from a server. And that's why I'm using Live Server here, and that's why it worked for me. What if I were to just use the file path and try to open it that way? Let's see how that would work. So I'm pasting in the file path. File comes up. And notice all the errors we're getting. So I just want to emphasize that in order to use native modules, you need to be serving up your files through a server. And since we're using Live Server within Visual Studio Code, that works for us. All right, now back to some different ways to do exports. This next way I'm going to show you is actually the way I prefer. I like to have it all at the bottom so I know everything that's being exported. So I'm going to remove the export statement from both of these functions. And then down here at the bottom, I'm just going to enter export. And then inside of curly braces, I put what I want to export. So in this case, format name, yell name. Like that. That's all I need to do. That would allow me to export them. Now over on the, let me save this first. Over on the app.js side, I don't need to do anything else different with the import statement. It's still good. So if I now look at our file again, you can see we're still getting the correct information. Now that's the way I prefer doing the export. But I do want to show you one additional way, and that is using a default export. Let's say we had a file, this utilities file, and there was only a single export that we wanted to provide. There was one thing this module was going to provide, and that's all, and we just wanted it to be the default. Now, an advantage of a default export is it provides the most concise syntax. So let me comment out yell name. I'm going to make that a default export. Now I need to do it using a function declaration as opposed to a function expression. There is a way to do it using the structure down here. Let me just show that really quick. I could do export yell name as default like this. I could do that, but that's not that concise. And so I'm going to show you the default export using a function declaration. So export default, I just add another keyword here, default, and then I declare the function. Like that. I'm just going to copy in this part here. So this is a function declaration, and that's how you do this as a default export. Now, that is the only thing that's being exported from this module. If I save that, we're going to get an error if we come back and look at this. The requested module does not provide the export name yell name. Okay? So basically what it's telling us is over here, it cannot find this. And that's because of the way we are importing. When you're importing a default, you don't use the curly braces. And you only import one thing. And you can name that whatever you would like. It doesn't have to be the name of what you exported from your module. Because basically a default export is not exporting the name, it's basically exporting something that is called default. And then when we import that default, we can give it any name. So I could say y name here like that. And then down here I could do y name, and let's just change things up here. Put my name in there. Let me comment out this because we don't have access to format name anymore, so we don't want to get an error from that. So now if I save that and come back out here, now it's working for us. So that's called a default export, and that's the most concise syntax. As you can see, export default, then we declare whatever it is we want to export. That could be a class. Then when we import, we can name it whatever we like. We don't have to use the curly braces, so it's a bit simpler. So there's a lot of different syntax for export and import. And before we finish here, I'm just going to go to MDN, take a look at the page there on import and export. Right now, we're looking at export. Here's exporting individual features. You just put the export command in front of it. Here's export list. This is the one I prefer. You can rename exports as you export them. See, we have as and then a new name. So the file you imported in, you'll be using that name, whatever is after as here. Destructured assignments can be exported. Default exports, this is how you can do default exports right here. And then if you want to export from other modules, you can do that as well. And it talks about that there. So you can go to this site and learn a bit more about export and the different ways you can do it. Also, you can learn a bit more about import. Let me pull that one up really quick. This is the default way. Here's the one I prefer most times. I use both default and I prefer this list as well. If there's a lot of things you need to import, you just put them in the list. You can rename them as you import them as well. As you can see, that's possible. So some different ways to import and export, and you can refer to those MDN web pages for that. I have some additional things I want to talk about in regards to native modules, so let's move on to the next topic.